Hi, and welcome to the Onyx Strategies Group video blog. I'm Crystal Morris Murphy, founder of Onyx Strategies Group, and I am joined today by guests who are steeped in their knowledge for providing trauma-informed care. And we were hoping to have this discussion in October for Emotional Wellness Month, but as COVID has taught us over the last few years that, life is nimble. And so we had to deal with those urgent situations, but now we're back and this conversation is still relevant in November as it was in October. So again, my guests are steeped in this expertise and they represent municipalities, the nonprofit sector, and the for-profit sector. And as a big part of their portfolio, they work in a collaborative setting or in strategic alliances to provide trauma-informed care. And so our conversation today will focus on that very thing. So how do they do that in collaboration with folks without, pulling their hair out and being successful in their delivery? So Maritza, Robert, and Rachel, are we ready to get started? Are we ready to do this?
Ready.
Sure.
Ready. All right, so let's start with a few introductions. I'll go ahead and begin with Maritza. Tell us who you are, who you represent, and why you got in this work. So what's your backstory?
Thank you so much, Crystal, and so nice to be here with you, Robert, and Rachel as well. I'm Maritza Arroyo. I'm Assistant Commissioner of Public-Private Partnerships for the New York City Department for the Aging. I am also an in-kind Executive Director for the Aging in New York Fund, which is the charitable arm of the agency, and as well as the liaison of the Age-Friendly New York City Commission. So 3 roles that are very, very aligned. 3 years now in the public sector. Prior to that, 13 years in the nonprofit sector, mostly in education, really working in a holistic manner, right, to ensure that our children have the academic outcomes that they deserve. And then prior to that, in the private sector, so cross-sector leader, and really just pleased to be having this really important conversation this morning.
Well, why did you get in this work? What prompted you to be here in this space?
Rachel and I were actually chatting earlier, when I started in the nonprofit space and education, clearly we can't have academic outcomes, right? If our children and our family are not well, right? And a lot of that wellness, right, or lack thereof is really trauma, right? And so really understanding where, what has happened to folks, right, as opposed to what's wrong with you, right, that kind of approach. And so early on in my career, I really started working in socio-emotional learning, right, for children. My principal partnerships, I would say, our kids have to be well first, right? Health is wealth, right? We can't, right, have quality of life, right, and earn dollars if we're not well. And so it's a passionate, right, subject for me and has informed, right, our work with older adults as well.
Great, thank you. Rachel?
Yes, no, good morning, Crystal, and thanks so much for having me as well. I serve as president of the Jacksonville Public Education Fund down here in the state of Florida. And I actually have been serving in my current capacity for about 4.5 years, moved back to Jacksonville about 5.5 years ago. And it was my second stint with the organization. So worked here before making the transition to the Bay Area and then DC, where we met, Crystal. But just a little bit about the Public Education Fund. We are an independent, not-for-profit organization. We like to call ourselves a think and do tank, in that our team does conduct research and analysis around educational issues to understand how we can better address the disparities that exist, making sure that we're really working to close the opportunity gap, especially for low-income students of color, and their peers in our community. We also serve as a convener. So when we talk about strategic alliances and really bringing partners together to co-labor in not only identifying challenges, but actively advancing solutions for our community, that's a part of our work as well. And then we have some deep work that we're doing in partnership with teacher leaders and elementary school principals to support them to pilot some evidence-based practices as well. My why is really centered in who I am as a person. I've had the pleasure, like Maritza, in serving in a variety of capacities. I actually have a little bit of background in government as well. Before I worked at America's Promise, with Crystal, I actually had a stint at the U.S. Department of Education. So really have had the opportunity to see the education system at different levels. But prior to all of that, sort of the core of who I am as a person is, when we're talking about the trauma that our communities experience, it's very much a part of my own story as a person. My son, who will be 21 week after next, I
Oh
cannot
my
believe
goodness.
that.
That's not real, but
I
okay.
know. Listen, I feel the same way. You guys can check on me in a couple of weeks. But I had him when I was 16 years old and come from a high poverty background myself. And so, our unique journey and story is one of really overcoming a lot of trauma. And so it's an honor and a privilege for me to do the work I do, in that I feel very much like I'm serving my family, I'm serving my community, and very much as I try to inspire young people, they're the Rachels of tomorrow. And so it's an honor and privilege to do this work. I'm, of course, as well thinking about my little babies, as I have an almost 4-year-old and a 7-month-old now, too.
Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate that. Robert, tell us about your journey and the work that you do and who you're representing today.
Well, thank you for having me, Crystal. I am president of Comprehensive Discipline Solutions, which is my own personal company. I spent 28 years in education, youth development. I worked at the Maryland State Department of Education. I'm the author of Maryland Public Schools State Code of Discipline. I've got a few regulations under my hat, and a few other things as it relates to Maryland Department of Education. After that, I went to the Lake Forest School District, and I was director of student services. So I had about 15 programs under my supervision. Most of them were dealing with the most traumatized students. Kind of how I got here is through my own trauma. I'm also the author of a book. Some people like the title, some people don't like the title, but I'll say the title nonetheless. The title of the book is called Niggas Ain't Astronauts. It is a story of my own trauma and my own family. And the title actually comes from something my mother said to me when I told her I wanted to be an astronaut. She looked at me very plainly and said, "Bobby, niggas ain't astronauts," and walked away. So the notion of trauma, as we talk about it, is so deep. And quite frankly, my personal belief is, and I've seen it in evidence in my own life and even in the kids that I've worked with over the years, is that trauma really dictates kind of where we go, how we go, and how we show up. And until we begin to kind of mitigate some of the circumstances that young people, as best we can, obviously we're not their parents, but as best we can, we're going to continue to kind of see the same results over and over again. And in my opinion, that's kind of why we're seeing some of the results we see in cities all over the United States.
Thank you all. Those are great narratives, and I sincerely appreciate you sharing your authentic selves with us this morning. And so before we get into the meat of our conversation, I just want to provide a bit of a context for the folks who will be seeing this later. And so according to Harvard University, they say that the practice of trauma-informed care is really defined as a culture of safety, empowerment, and healing. And it acknowledges also that safety, empowerment, and healing must come from care teams. And those teams need to garner a complete picture of the patient's history, both past and present. And so, in essence, what you all do is a really big deal. You are helping people who are struck with trauma you're helping folks to be unstuck from those moments of distress. And that's really important. And so this question is the discussion is for all of you today just to join in. So it'll be great for people to understand, a bit about who are your primary constituents for trauma care delivery. So if you want to, give us an idea about their demographics, that kind of thing, that'd be great for us to understand. Sure, go ahead. I'll just go forward, Robert. Thank you.
Oh no, my constituents are community organizations, schools, school staff, as well as young people. I ran an after-school program for about 30 African-American males most recently, and some of the stories and information that I received from them was both empowering but also very disturbing. So I have a broad swath of people that I work with, specifically in the alliance piece. One of the things I think that I know education struggles with is everything is so compartmentalized. And I don't know if that's the case with other entities, but I know for us, like when I was director of student services, one of the challenges that we faced was DSS wouldn't share information with us, and then we couldn't get information from some of the other entities. So one of the biggest things I think is probably collaboration.
What is DSS, please, for some of those who may not know?
Department of Social Services. Department of Social Services, Department of Juvenile Services, things like that. I think sometimes the systems really struggle when we start talking about alliances and coming together. Entities really struggle with communicating. Some of that is legal, some of that is the perception of legal, and some of that is just people don't want to share.
Okay, so your constituents are primarily the students and not necessarily whole families and things like that.
It's a blend. It can be students. It can be, like I said, I do a lot of work with teachers on trauma-informed care, and administrators on trauma-informed care, and then also sometimes parents. It just really depends.
Great. Rachel, Maritza?
I can go next. So the sort of latter part of our work and strategy that I mentioned, our strategic initiatives that really allows us to do the deep work ourselves. Through that work, we're supporting teacher leaders and school leaders to adopt solutions that drive equitable improvements, as well as to help retain high-performing teachers in our schools, because we know that as far as school-based factors that impact student achievement, teachers have the greatest impact within schools. And so we actually deploy quite a lot of support directly to principals and teachers to really make sure that they are able to advance supports within their schools that are going to support the whole child. So I would say they're the direct recipient of a lot of the training and support that we're providing to make sure that students are receiving those supports within our local schools. In addition, though, because, as I mentioned earlier, we really describe our role as a think and do tank. We're going about piloting strategies in partnership with teachers and principals so that we can learn from that work, and really so that system leaders, as well as our community at large, can advance the policies and practices across the system that will really best serve our students. And, just as an example, I have here our Building a Trauma-Informed Public School brief that was released last summer of 2021. So really packaging some of the best practices that we learned from some work that we were doing with one school in particular, so that others can learn from that work, and hopefully those models can be replicated.
Excellent. Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate that. Maritza, who are some of your constituents?
Thank you. So these past 3 years, right, with the New York City Department of the Aging, right, our constituent is older adult, right? New York City has 1.7 million older adults, and we define that as 60 plus, and only continuing to grow. And clearly that phenomena is worldwide, right? The world is getting older, right, not younger. Having said that, we also do have some intergenerational programs, and we just recently launched the Cabinet for Older New Yorkers in partnership with Mayor Adam, which is comprised of 19 city agencies that touch older adults, and I'm part of the intergenerational subcommittee. So part of the work that I'll be doing, right, primarily with Department of Youth and Community Development, UICD, Parks, Cultural Affairs, and of course New York City DOE, is around having a series of roundtables will be one of the first projects that we'll do. And so what I intend to do is bring this work, right, into those conversations, and really starting to dispel, right, these stereotypes of ageism, right, for both youth and older adults, because ageism clearly has some health implications, right? I think it's around $63 billion a year in health costs, right? So if we can start dismantling ageism, we're getting right to a path of wellness, right, and health. But prior to that, right, clearly 13 years, right, in the education sector and working with families. As I said earlier, before a child can readily attain, right, a lot of these academic outcomes, we need wellness, and it takes a village, right? right, and the entire family. So a lot of the work that I did in those 13 years was, bringing socio-emotional learning to the forefront. So a lot of my programs, right, that I brought to schools, focused on that. And so, trauma, informed care, I think, is something that not new, but not widely used, at least from my perspective here in New York City. So I'm really looking forward, right, to bringing that to the table in this intergenerational work that I'm about to head.
Great, thank you. And so as I listen to all of you, people work is messy. And it's really challenging. It is not linear at all. And so when you're working in collaboration with other folks, I mean, you've got, challenging demographics as well as working, in a collaboration and have to consider other points of view. So I'd love to know, what are some of the biggest challenges that your collaboration has been faced with? And, how were you able to overcome that, or did you overcome it?
I'm happy, oh, sorry, Rachel, I'm happy to start. So one of the things that I learned that's really important is shared definitions, right? Coming to agreement, right? And so in a lot of the work that I've done through collective impact framework is around, what is this shared, right, goal or agenda that we're focused on, and agreeing, right, on what that means, and agreeing, right, on shared results, metrics. So I learned early on, right, to getting that buy-in is around, getting consensus, right, in terms of, the words that we're using, in terms of the work that we're doing.
And I'll just add to that. That is sort of core, really doing that intentional work that Maritza just described, to really get everybody on the same page, having that common agenda. I think once the plans are laid, then, we have to hold ourselves and each other accountable for actually the part that we're supposed to be playing and really driving the solutions that we're working to advance. And so, from our experience as well, first getting, folks to kind of provide those clear, measurable components that they're specifically going to help drive as a part of the collective strategy. That sometimes is a laborious process, but once you can get there, really then leveraging the data to come back and learn from it, that can be, challenging as well. Even, I'll say my experience lately has been that data access has been increasingly challenging as well. And so, I can probably diagnose that for political reasons and otherwise, but, just really making sure that we can norm on what is. So, making sure that partners can access the data that's necessary for us to really just determine, here is where we are experiencing some challenges and where we need to double down on certain strategies. But if data access is inhibited, then, that, becomes a barrier to us being able to do that collective work. So that's one of the challenges that I would name.
I want to dive a little deeper into that, but Robert, any challenges in terms of your being able to work collaboratively, and, were you able to get through those? And if not, how did that work?
I'd say it's probably I'd say maybe 60-40, 70-30 thing. Like, there are times when you kind of have a hive mentality and everybody is working towards making a family or a student or whoever's life better. So you all collaborate and kind of get on the same page. You set measurable goals. You are focused on results, not necessarily on research or conversations. Because sometimes my experience has been, in these larger things, we lose sight of the target. My target has always been young people and their families getting better. I don't really, all of the other stuff, sometimes I think we kind of drag into the conversation. I think is just, to me, it doesn't need to be in the conversation. So I think what Rachel said earlier with the data thing, it is a huge piece. As I do work across the country, it's very interesting to me to see what data is available and what data is unavailable. I was doing something in Missouri and I was able to pull some data down, but the data wasn't really as clear as it probably should have been. And this was a community, a Missouri Department of Education system that was supposed to be for parents to actually just look at it and make assessment. And it was really just, it was a poor example, in my opinion. I've seen some better examples, and I see this all over the country. I did something in Michigan recently, and it was a very similar thing. So I think the data integrity, or the data, the openness of the data, I think is a challenge. But I also think sometimes too, if you work in a government agency, sometimes government agencies get caught up in silos and laws and imaginary laws, where they create these, well, we can't share this because of this or that, or because of HIPAA. And it's like, well, no, your Department of Social Services, HIPAA doesn't really apply to you. Doesn't really apply to you. That's related to health. And so there's all these things you have to go through. And then depending on, I think one of the biggest challenges I have seen is also the change in leadership. So if you have a new elected leader, they bring in somebody new who does not have the same value as the prior person. So you're constantly rehabbing and revising new relationships. And depending on the priorities of the new person, sometimes you don't necessarily get to have continuity in your work.
That's great. And with that said, some of those challenges, are you all ever met with partner burnout? I'd love to hear some specific examples. And if you are met with partner burnout, it could be you as a partner, or if you are, well, if you are the partner, or if you are the coordinating entity of your alliance, how are you managing for those folks who are just feel like they're called upon all the time, when you have other partners who may not be showing up as much as others? So I'd love to know, through those challenges, how are you able to mitigate that? It's a big deal.
In the nonprofit space, right, where I was before, I created an assessment around partnership readiness, right? Because, and this is my opinion, we don't have time to waste, right? This is important work, and it's critical work. So I wanted partnerships that, right, we're going to be ready. And so we created an assessment, right? And so we, is this partner ready, almost ready? Can they be worked, right? And some real, thought into it. Then followed by an MOU.
Excellent.
Right. This is what we're going to bring to the table. This is what you're going to bring to the table. This is how many times we're going to meet. And then a communication plan, right? A communication strategy and plan. Repetition is key, right? To the movement. So to me, those are strategies that I've learned early on that work and avoid that partnership burnout, right? Or avoid the roadblocks, right? That sometimes not having the right partners create.
So
Excellent.
I completely agree. And I would add as well, just in terms of some carrying more of the weight than others, some of what we've really tried to do through our work as well is to make sure that we're recognizing people for the contributions that they're making. Sometimes that's a motivator for folks who aren't quite, doing as much. So I see so-and-so being recognized, be it in the newspaper, on social media, really their leadership being elevated because it's the way that they're contributing to the work. And we want to make sure that's held up. So oftentimes, at an individual level, even running an organization, having recognition programs and being intentional about that really helps to keep people who are going above and beyond motivated in bringing what it is that they're bringing to the work. And also, that serves as a model for others in helping them really understand, how they can similarly add significant value.
Mm-hmm. Robert, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just add too, I think that understanding everybody's role, I think sometimes we get into these rabbit holes in relationship to trauma and trying to help people because we all are motivated to help people. That's kind of why we're in this business. And I think one of the biggest things is also recognizing whose role is what. And then deviating or making responsibilities around those particular subject matters. I, as an educator, have a certain responsibility, and Department of Social Services has a different responsibility, and ensuring that those lines typically aren't blurred, or we don't. In some ways, they have to come together. That's just reality. But in the most objective ways, trying to ensure that we don't cross each other and that I don't hammer them with extra work and they don't hammer me with extra work. I also think too, kind of going back to something that Rachel said, as I work with buildings and teachers and administrators, people are fried. And to your point, Rachel, I think recognition is a huge piece. I know as a building administrator and even as a consultant, I was working in the school last year and I saw just some challenges with the staff, and I paid for them to have Christmas dinner just because like they needed something to kind of make them feel better. So I think, again, as a consultant, that's what I did. And as an administrator, I've done that as well. I think it's important to recognize, and that is going to create that culture that is going to make people want to keep coming back and want to stay where you are. Because that's the other thing. We have this job, people are moving around because they don't feel valued. So again, the recognition thing is a huge piece.
I really wanted to echo both what you've said, Robert and Rachel, right? So first is having the right partners at the table, and then it's celebrating those quick wins. And our role, right, as conveners and facilitators or consultants is to be that cheerleader, that champion, and the clarity, right? So folks, the first thing folks are saying, are you going to create more work for me?
That's right. That's right.
So really being clear on those roles and who's doing what is really critical too. So I thank you both for bringing those points up.
And just for clarity's sake, for folks who are thinking about trying to get in partnership with other organizations and how to do this, what are some of the specific sectors, or who are some of the organizations that you all are working with? Like, what's going to make a really robust alliance?
I'll start and just build on what Maritza just said. I think, oftentimes folks who might hear of something, be excited and want to be a part of it. I think you really got to start by asking yourselves and all partners who are potentially interested, how does this align with my strategic priorities? Because it shouldn't feel like creating something that's wholly separate or new that has nothing to do with what you're doing. You should be coming to tables that truly do represent the strategic work that you are working to advance, and which you can add strategic value to. And so sort of that alignment piece has to be true in the first case. So I'll use, for example, we have a collaborative effort to build a more diverse teacher pipeline in Duval County. And the reason why we're doing that work is because, we know that there's a growing body of evidence that the race of educators contributes to student outcomes. And when students have students or teachers in the classroom who look like them, that has a really positive impact on them as well in the classroom as well as beyond the classroom. So through our 1,000 by 2025 initiative, we have of course, the public school system, Duval County Public Schools at the table. Their Human Capital Office has a number of individuals involved. It's important that the assistant superintendent herself is bought in, but they have actually dedicated capacity to these collaborative efforts, and it really speaks to this being a priority for them. We also have our local sort of institution of higher learning, the University of North Florida, which is a critical part of our teacher pipeline. And they have this shared priority of really seeking to build a more diverse student body in the College of Education, so that ultimately that sort of feeds the local teacher pipeline as well. At the table for us, we have Teach for America Jacksonville, as well as City Year, and other organizations who support even younger students who are in school today, but have opportunities through peer tutoring efforts that they have to help, encourage young people who are getting involved in those efforts to consider sort of feeding that pipeline into the local university. So really, kind of going back to the first point, it's just so important that folks come to the right tables based on what their work is and what their strategic priorities are.
Curious, Rachel, follow up. Do you have any parent groups or anything like that that are involved in your alliance?
Absolutely. So one of our initiatives at the Public Education Fund, it kind of is most closely associated with our research and advocacy work, but we have an initiative called Parents Who Lead, which is in and of itself a collaborative effort between the Public Education Fund, the public school system, and actually the city of Jacksonville Kids Hope Alliance, which is our sort of child serving agency. And really through Parents Who Lead, we're identifying and supporting, building the capacity of parents who want to take their leadership to the next level. So I'll use as an example, one gentleman who's involved in that effort I just described, a parent here, his name is Marcus Smothers. His project through Parents Who Lead was focused on supporting and identifying and better retaining male teachers of color. And so he's been an instrumental leader as a part of those efforts as well. He actually happens to work at City Year. So when he's serving on our pipeline building group, he's wearing both of those hats. And we find that, extremely important. So as we're, working with our partners to identify who's the right, individual to bring, oftentimes we find that it's, advantageous and beneficial when folks can even wear multiple hats at the table.
Excellent. How about your people at your table, Maritza and Robert?
Oh, I was going to say, go ahead, Robert, but my mic is on, so I'll go. I've had such an honor and privilege, right, to have done grassroots, right, work, right, in community, to now being at a very macro level, right, working for the city of New York. So this cabinet of older New Yorkers is going to be groundbreaking work, right? When you look at 19, right, city agencies with thousands and thousands, right, of services and programs, the majority, right, done through contracts, right, through with community-based organizations. And we're early on in this work. So one of the first things on our short-term project is a scan, which has never been done before. So we just shared, right, the big spreadsheet yesterday to get a scan of all the services and programs that these 19 agencies are doing, right, with older adults, right? And so that's the first step. Like, what are we doing, so that we can then inform us, right? What needs to scale, right? What gaps are there? And then really long term, this work is going to lead to policy, right? To policy recommendations and legislation, because that's where it happens. So I know that the Health Committee is looking at Medicare, right, and Medicaid. We've got a financial security committee, right, that's looking at workforce development, but also benefit access. It's just really exciting work, right, that is going to change, right, millions and millions of lives here in New York City. But I do love my grassroots. I miss it dearly. So the work that you just explained, Rachel, oh my God, it's wonderful. And Jacksonville is very lucky to have you.
Oh, thank you so much. And Crystal, I know you're probably about to turn to Robert. If I could just say something that Maritza's comments sparked for me as well. I can't believe I didn't hold up. Of course, as a part of that initiative, like, we have to have Black and brown men at the table themselves, right? And so the teachers. So we have some dynamic educators themselves, and former educators, who are really helping to lead that work. And it's been important for us, even as they sit across from the assistant superintendent, right, that they understand that their voice carries equal weight at those decision-making tables. So I didn't want to miss that point. And of course, sectors like business and others are also, important to have at those tables.
Excellent. So Robert Murphy, who's sitting at your table to do this work?
Right now, me? No, I'm just kidding. Working with districts, and again, kind of the political stuff that goes on with districts, many superintendents aren't hanging around like for 10, 12 years. You've got 3 or 4 years really to make an impact. So it really is connecting with kind of the people who are not appointed to their positions and are more kind of day-to-day and are kind of career people in those types of environments, particularly in like departments of education and things like that, the more stable people, not necessarily the appointees. The other thing is, I think, is you have to do research kind of on what the new motivations are, that can come through a strategic plan, that can come through your own strategic plan, and kind of aligning kind of what your kind of goals and your goals and objectives are. I would also say too, and I don't want to rehash what everyone else said, because you ladies did a wonderful job. I would just say at its core, it is about relationships, regardless whether it's an organization or it's a group or it's individuals. It is about relationships, integrity, and personability. I've seen some really great initiatives oftentimes be led by people who weren't necessarily personable, and those initiatives have oftentimes failed. So to me, it all starts with the person who is leading or attempting to build that relationship in that strategic alliance. Because at the end of the day, just like with money, people work with people because they like people, just like they give money to people that they trust. So it's very similar. So to me, it has to begin at that relationship level, as well as kind of doing some research on kind of what you need to do as an organization, and kind of even to some point, even some of your leverage as well, or lack thereof.
So how do each of you show up in your strategic alliances? So are you just participating, or are you the backbone in leading the coordination and funding and et cetera? So also what I didn't hear is, who are the philanthropic organizations that you have at the table? And so I just love to know more specifically how you show up for these alliances. And what do you think, from your perspective, is a good and manageable and sustainable number of folks at the table? Are there too many? Or so just would like to hear a little bit more about that kind of thing.
Well, I can start and say, so we have really two major issue areas that we're really helping to organize the community around. One, we're kind of singularly the backbone organization, and that's that diverse teacher push. And then the other area that we're currently convening the community around, we serve as co-lead alongside our local Children and Youth Serving Agency, the Kids Hope Alliance. And even within that co-lead structure, we've had to be very clear on roles and responsibilities. And so our contribution to that work is that we are the organization that's bringing the steering committee together, as well as helping to drive and support partners who are involved in one of the two goal areas. So there's an awareness raising and community engagement goal area, and then there is a systems building goal area. Because the Kids Hope Alliance is really a funder of the after-school providers, the early learning programs, as well as summer learning programs, it made sense to us that they really sort of take the lead. Although, I serve on the systems building committee, so we contribute our expertise to those efforts as well. But there's really kind of the clarity around that shared leadership of that particular effort. And that's our Read Jax campaign to help address literacy disparities in our community. Size-wise, at the steering committee level, the magic number that we try to stick to, or somewhere around there, is like a 12 to 15. Okay. Feels like about the right size. But then there's working groups, right? So other folks who are involved in a different level of implementation of the work, or even those organizations who are at the steering committee level who have directors or others who really will help implement some of the different things that are discussed at the strategic common agenda level. We found that the subcommittees or the working groups are different ways to engage other partners who have an interest, but might not necessarily be the right fit for that steering committee.
Perfect. Robert, Maritza, how do you show up for your alliance?
Can you clarify that statement?
Which part? Showing like how you show up, or or how are you governed? What's the sweet spot for you in terms of numbers of folks at the table, et cetera?
I think I've led groups that are as large as 50 or 60. I've led groups that are as large as 15 or 20. I think it really depends on the clarity of the task at hand. If you are, but really the clarity of the task at hand, and again, the trust and the relationships that people have with the kind of the convening organization. I've seen things when I was working in Baltimore where there were entities that pulled people together that didn't necessarily have the credibility, and thus turnout was bad, engagement was bad, and performance was bad. So again, that whole notion again of relationships, stability, and integrity are the things I think that in most cases kind of drive the work. And again, that drives the work, whether it's 40 people, it's 60 people. When I rewrote the State Code of Discipline, I had 47 stakeholder groups, and a lot of them were at each other's throats. The parents wanted this, the teachers wanted that, the administrators wanted that, the advocates wanted this. And so kind of pull all of those people together around a common interest or a common thing, initially was a little rough, but after we kind of worked on some things and worked through some things, it actually became very, they were very supportive and actually thought we didn't go far enough with some of the work that we did. So again, I think you can change people's minds, but again, it really is about the leadership that the convening organization has, and again, their respect and their honesty and integrity as well.
And as you said, relationships.
Yeah. I just a quick question or quick statement. I remember when I was doing the work in Maryland, somebody put my name in the newspaper and said I was responsible, and within hours I'd gotten like 1,700 emails, and they really shut my email down for the weekend. Instead of just saying, oh, there's something wrong with them, I actually drove to that particular county and sat with them and talked to parents and talked to the administrators and talked to the district administrators, and a lot of that stuff was mitigated. You still had a few people who were unhappy, but by and large, the fact that I went and showed up and showed my face and gave them very clear answers on what the policy was and what it wasn't, I think went a long way in people trusting me and knowing that I was honest and I had integrity and all those things. So.
Okay, so you're really just a driver and a participant for getting the spokes in the wheel to manage together well.
Yeah. For me personally, that is my role, has been my role in just about everything that I've done.
And Maritza, so how is the New York City Department for Aging showing up? Are you guys the lead convener, or are you just kind of at the table helping the leader to deploy these services?
So prior to forming the cabinet, I think, we all know, very siloed, in terms of agency. So again, really exciting, work that's about to really happen with this cabinet. And so we're the backbone, We're the ones convening, and like any groups of folks were storming and moving into norming, and then the vision is that in the really near future that these liaisons that have been appointed by their respective commissioners are going to take the lead, and that the Department for the Aging really more is a kind of facilitator, perhaps more of a subject matter expert, and as it relates to aging. We want folks to own these projects within these 5 subcommittees: health and housing and financial security, intergenerational, and safety, which is NYPD and the Department of Transportation with Vision Zero. But then in nonprofit, at United Way, we were also kind of the backbone. I led 2 important projects: Read NYC, which was place-based, in terms of raising literacy outcomes, of a collective impact, again, approach. So we were really the backbone, identified an anchor community-based organization, and then, I think 30 or 40 partners, be it community-based organizations. There were 7 schools, so those principals, those teachers, again, very matrixed, So, and then Zone 126, as you know, America's Alliance was the funder of ours. We were the backbone as well, in this place-based collective impact work through community schools, It's the same thing at United Way. I had a community school also, Educate NYC, but so as the backbone, really leading work, focus on the 3 public housing developments, Astoria Houses, Ravenswood, and Queensbridge, which is the largest, public housing development in the country, and doing the work within, feeder schools, So a set of elementary, middle, and high, so 6 partner schools, and then through that work, again, partnership readiness, MOUs, I was able to secure with my fantastic team, as you know, Anju Ruchandani, secure 21 partnerships that brought, variety of programs through our, Thrive to 5, which was 0 to 5, our elementary, middle school, high school, and then post, to that career track. And that, 21 partners, and then funders as well, as DYCD, DOE. So, and all of this work, right, that we all do requires, right, a multi-pronged approach and a variety of partners, right, it takes a village to do this work. So it's been really the backbone and convener, throughout these past 13, actually now 18 years.
And so how are you evaluating your success, and how often are you doing it? So, gosh, this conversation could be an hour and a half, but how are you evaluating, and what does success look like for you in your alliance?
I am results driven.
Yes.
I think sometimes I wonder if we are research driven or results driven, because we spend a lot of time talking about research, and I've been a part in both at the school, state, and the local level where we sell these programs, and they're research based, but I never seem to see the results that I want to see with the program sometimes that I use. So for me, it's always being results based. And as a district person, I check my stuff every month. As a state person, it was an annual check because that was typically, or every 6 months you check your data. But I think data has to lead whatever conversation you're talking about, because at the end of the day, I think we focus a lot on research, not necessarily on results. And what we're really trying to do as we bring the conversation back to about people who are impacted by trauma is we want results. We want them to now have stable housing, or to have food access, or to have jobs, or to whatever it is. So again, those are the things that I think motivate me, and that's where I start.
I echo that, right? Like what gets measured gets done, and what gets measured gets results, right? Or else we're just, spinning our wheels. So I'm a disciple of logic models. I deeply believe if we do this, then, right, we can expect these outcomes. And I think it just grounds everyone, right? Every partner, right? In terms of, we've got this vision, right? That all children, can read and do math. But before that, right? What are those short-term and midterm outcomes? And it also is a roadmap, right? So like, as you're doing the work, you're analyzing, right? All that data is coming in, what's working? Are we, hitting these milestones, these benchmarks? What's not working? How do we pivot, right? So logic models all the way, and data all the way.
Okay.
So I couldn't agree more. I don't even know if I have much to add, because I think you guys hit the nail on the hammer on the nail here. I said that backwards. But
it's early.
I'll add, yes. The only thing I will add is my colleague found an amazing resource recently. So, for data is king, and like obviously whatever the goal is that you're driving toward, you got to kind of evaluate, are we on track? In what ways are we not, and why? In all of the different components of what's being done. We did find a resource recently as well that really points to some measures of like how effective you're being as the backbone, if that's the role you're playing. And so, really taking a look at, our partners, do they have those clear agreements and understanding of what their role is? To what extent are people actually, executing the things that they said they would, and how are you as the backbone supporting that? So that's been, important for us as we sort of assess, particularly for like a collective impact model, are we being effective in our role to help us drive towards those outcomes that, collectively as a group we're seeking to advance.
And if I might add real quickly on the data piece, because I talked about it, but I think also there's a need to really, as we start talking about strategic alliances as well as nonprofits, there's also a need to kind of do a deeper dive. What does our data tell us? Is it concentrated or is it systemic? So an example, when I was doing the work in Maryland, I had 20 of my 400 middle schools in the state that were responsible for 77% of all my suspension. That meant 320 or 420 schools weren't really having these issues. So what we tried to do then, what we wanted to do was focus on those 20. And everywhere I've been, everywhere I go, and every data set I look at, there's typically a concentrated population whether it's administrators, teachers, kids, or families who are driving a lot of your data. So if you're struggling with resources or limited with resources, it might behoove you to focus your resources on them if you have limited resources, versus trying to do a systemic thing where you're trying to impact 6 or 12 or 20 different things. You might want to focus on, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 families. I can think of when I was director of student services, I had one lady who had 7 kids, and her kids were from elementary to high school. And one intervention in that family was impacting probably a 20 or 30% possibly of the referrals that I was having in each building. So just, again, something to consider. When you talk about data, it's also important to do deeper dives with data as well, not just focus on the surface level.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Robert, right? Because you can easily go down a rabbit hole, right? And so, yes, the deeper analysis of data then really creates really strategic, right, approaches, right, and interventions that can have tremendous systemic change, right? So I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Absolutely. No, I echo that. I was just sitting here thinking, like, you need to know sort of the bottom line result, but then you also have to, for wherever the shortcomings are, you have to understand why, right? And so for us, like, just using that example I mentioned earlier of the work to really recruit, support, and retain more diverse male teachers, we need to talk to diverse male teachers, not just those at the steering committee table, but we also need to hear from those who are serving in our schools today. So, as we also collect data on, where are we from a recruitment and a retention standpoint, we also want to dig beneath the surface and understand why. And it kind of goes back to earlier comments that we made around, data access and what's being collected, because I think through our journey as well, we've been able to look at what data is available and what data is not. And I think that begs some critical questions of, like, why don't we have this data? And, those become some of the larger lessons learned for the collaborative as well, because we don't want to just hit this goal that's set for this time-bound goal that we've set for this collective work. But hopefully this is sparking systemic, change and, different ways that all of the partners at the table are doing this work and keeping this a priority long term.
And if I might add, this is the last thing I'll say about data, and then I'm gonna stop talking about data. This data, I love me some data. The other thing is for particular programs, like oftentimes in the nonprofit world, I have seen organizations not capture data.
Yeah.
And the scary part for me is data should really inform what your strategic plan is, what types of programs, services, staffing, you name it. It can tell you even the culture and climate of your particular program or your particular initiative. But I see so many nonprofits really struggling to really capture data. And there's some really simple ways that you can actually capture it. You don't have to do you can do an extensive dive, but you also can do a very basic dive that'll give you really rich data as far as your program's functioning, your best practices, et cetera, so forth, and actually where you need to focus your resources as well. So I'm done with the data.
Look, I'm going to continue the data conversation or collecting too much data.
Yeah.
Analysis
It puts you in the same kind of situation.
Yeah.
So I feel like this.
I think the point is that, and I'll go back to my logic model. The logic model disciplines you, right, in collecting the right data.
Yes.
Because too much data is not good either.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Amen.
That's right. I feel like we need to have a part 2 of this conversation. I really do, because I'm left like I think there's so many things that the folks who will see this will also have some follow-up questions. Like they would like to know, okay, so what are those simple things that we can do for data, or what are those other things that we could be doing in partnership? And so I feel like I might need to call you guys back so that we could do a part 2, because I'm also left with some questions. But there is one thing that I'd like to ask you all as we begin to wrap up. And I'd love to know, what has been the most rewarding aspect of your work in delivering trauma-informed care? And if you can give a specific example of what you delivered in terms of folks who are struggling with a particular trauma.
That lady I mentioned earlier, that I talked about, that had the 7 children. there were a lot of struggles with her. She was unwed. There were multiple fathers involved. She had a sister who was healthy and just dropped dead. And that caused her son to kind of have some issues. We basically filled in at every level, and she also was homeless. So we made sure we connected with Department of Social Services and got her a place to stay. We gave her kids extra food. I specifically went out and bought her kids clothes because, quite frankly, they didn't have clothes because they'd been evicted and they lost some stuff. And we got them a whole bunch of other things. And then also I brought in, because I had some extra money from my budget that I actually took out of my budget and wanted to provide mental health services to my students. So I actually paid for a counselor to come and work with her son, especially the youngest one, who seemed to be the most impacted by the loss of his aunt. So that was actually probably one of the more impactful, kind of feel good at the end of the day. I mean, I don't want to speak for you guys, or you ladies, I'm sorry. But I know for me, you help so many people that, it's just a part of what you do. The other parts of that, though, sometimes is that you help so many that sometimes you kind of got to help yourself as well.
Oh.
We're going to go there right before we close. We're going there. But yes, I'd love to hear specific examples.
I'll just build on what Robert just shared as well, because he ended right where I was going to begin, which is what's been really rewarding for me is as we've been supporting educators in particular to increase their knowledge and understanding of what trauma-informed care and instructional practices look like for students. It's been very rewarding to also ensure through the support we're providing them to become even more effective in their teaching practices, that they learn how to take better care of themselves, right? And so in this particular moment, and just the way that where the world is right now, like there is a great need for I'll say public servants on the whole, because that's, one way that we often describe teachers. We always think about what they can and should be doing for us, but we don't think about the support that they need to fill their tank and their gas in order for them to, remain motivated, inspired. They're committed. They're there because they care about these babies and they care about our communities. But what is it that we need to be creating for them as far as safe space for them to take care of themselves? And so that's been a true value in that work for us, is being able, as we're not the district, we're not to whom they're accountable, but to create those safe spaces in which they can nurture each other and nurture themselves. So that's been a part of the greatest gift of that work for us.
Awesome.
I want to appreciate both Robert and Rachel for what you do, and again, I miss being on the ground. So when I was on the ground, the most rewarding moment for me was seeing the implementation, right, of socio-emotional learning, right, programs and practices, right, trainings for our teachers and principals coming to fruition. Right. So doing those site visits and seeing the data, attendance improvement, right, behavior improvement, and seeing, right, children engage in those classrooms. It's, yeah, I get choked, talking about it.
Well, because you pour into people all the time, and because we're belatedly celebrating Emotional Wellness Month, what are the things that each of you are doing to take care of your own emotional wellness?
That's good. Well, I'll start, and I'll say, in full transparency, I've not always been good at this, but COVID this whole season has been such a reminder that, and to what Robert said a little bit ago, that sad story of somebody like dropping, if we don't take care of ourselves, we will expire as well. And so for me, just practically what that looks like, there's a friend of mine here. She created a space through a group called Lead the Way of women of color CEOs just coming together to create community. And literally what we did in that space was we had mindful moments. We literally practice breathing ourselves and created, communities of support where we can like literally like just call each other, because like literally wearing the different identities and the hats that we wear, that in and of itself, has its own, complexity as we lead our respective organizations. So that's one thing. I live in Florida. I'm from Florida, so it's cold now, so I won't do this. But when it's warm, I love to just go and sit on American Beach and just look at the water. That's my happy place. And, I try as best I can to kind of do my self-care treatments, whether that be a massage or a manicure, pedicure, all of those things, help me, just those. That's where I have little kids too. I mentioned that. But when my husband can cover the babies and I just go do my me care treatments, those really kind of fill my cup and I'm ready to go again.
Mhm.
All right. How about
That
you,
kitchen
Maritza?
cabinet is so important, right? Those folks that you can go to, right? To just, maybe not even talk, although I'm always talking about the work we do because it's not really work, right? It's service. So that kitchen cabinet has always been, really important, for me. Moments like this. And so thank you, Crystal. I want to
Yes.
appreciate you for getting us together. And what a way to start the day, right? So feeling much gratitude and appreciation. And travel. Cold in Jacksonville, I don't know. Cold in New York City. Okay.
That's
It's
true.
cold.
Listen.
You're so right.
So, getting, being able to travel back home is St. Croix, back home is Puerto Rico, Miami, warm weather and beach. The beach really always grounds me, right? As well. So I wish I could, do it more often. And sometimes like Oprah, nothing days, right? A day where I just do nothing. If I want to just read or I just want to watch, lights, TV, right? Movies. I think those are important and it's okay. It's okay to have those do nothing days.
I love it. I love it. And Mr. Murphy, how do you take care of yourself?
First and foremost, it really is about finding your pleasure and knowing what that pleasure is. Like one of the pleasures I have and that it makes me feel good is to help other people. And so, especially obviously people you love, but also just people on the street or whatever. So helping people is a way to make me feel good. And not people that I'm mandated to help, but people that just may need a little help here or there, maybe change a tire, putting air in the tire, whatever it is, paying for somebody's dinner or not paying for somebody's dinner, paying somebody's groceries, something at the store. One little girl, I was at the market one time and she wanted a special ice cube thing. And the mother was like, no, I'm not buying that. No. And I was like, well, ma'am, can I buy it for her? And she was like, oh yeah. So I bought it for her. And every time I see the little girl, she runs up and just gives me a huge hug. And it comes out of nowhere. I don't even see her coming. She just comes and jumps on me. So it's that kind of stuff. I think from a physical standpoint, it's working out for me. It's kayaking. I'm a gamer. I've been a gamer since I was 6. So playing video games kind of de-escalates me. And just for me, it also is kind of thinking about where I came from. And it helps me kind of recenter myself in understanding like, at 12 years old, I was sleeping in the car. And here I am making decisions and helping people and all those things. So life is good. Life is good for me. And I have to always keep that first and foremost.
Oh, you guys, this has been such a powerful discussion for me, and I appreciate your taking the time to share it on a Friday morning. It's just been wonderful to see all of you grow and develop over time, and I wish you continued success, and I look forward to watching your stars grow as you continue to do this important work. And for those of you out there who'd like more information about my guests and what they do, I would suggest that you take a look at their websites and also on their social media channels, starting with LinkedIn first. And finally, a shameless plug for Onyx Strategies Group. If your organization is looking to expand its sphere of influence through mission critical partnerships, strategy, and board development, we can definitely help. So check us out at onyxstrategiesgroup.com for more information. So that will do it for us. I so appreciate each and every one of you. And I hope you have a wonderful week. And thank you again to my guests for an awesome conversation. Have a blessed week.